right. Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm sure we'll have other folks hop on here as we get started. But welcome to this first opportunity for public engagement on ADAPT DSM, the city's climate action and adaptation plan. We'll get into more details about other opportunities to engage on this project moving forward, but this is just the first of many opportunities to participate and provide your feedback and guidance as we develop this plan. And so we've got a decent group of folks registered, and we're excited to hear your ideas and experiences and have those inform our planning process. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our consulting team, Shelby and Molly, and they'll start with a few ground rules for you to consider as we move through this process, and then we'll dive into more of the details about the plan.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jeremy. So Jeremy's the Sustainability Program Manager for the City of Des Moines, for those who just joined us. And I am Shelby Summer with Brendel Group. I am the project manager for the consulting team. So I work for an organization called Brendel Group, and we are joined by Molly Hansen and Pat Bodie with RDG Planning and Design, a Des Moines-based firm. So tonight we've got a fun-filled 90 minutes together. We have a series of activities, both some information sharing as well as group discussions. We're hoping that through this process, through this meeting, that you learn about the process that we are going through to develop the climate action and adaptation plan. We want to listen and learn about your all's perceptions about climate risks and vulnerabilities facing your households, businesses, as well as the broader community. And then we want to do some brainstorming about potential solutions. So I just want to underscore that this is a very initial first workshop that we're doing, the first of many different engagement activities. And so tonight is not a decision-making meeting. This is an initial meeting to start thinking about concepts and begin identifying some potential ideas and solutions. We're not going to make priorities or lists of recommendations tonight. This is really to get all ideas on the table, so all ideas are good ideas. All right, so we've got a good band of the 19 to 49 crew. So a lot of people that might be of working age. We've got a smaller cohort of the over 50 crew. I'm missing that. I noticed that we're missing the youth voice. So that is something that we're going to be working hard with the school district and university partners. We really want to make sure that we're hearing from youth. You know, climate change is going to impact the future tremendously. And so we want to make sure that we're including them. So we'd love your help getting their voices at the table. We've got a mix of gender identities. Let's see. Definitely a white predominant group, but a little bit of diversity here. This is, again, something that we're going to be targeting and trying to make sure that we're connecting with a range of different races and ethnicities through this process. We will tabulate the zip code information and the information about how you heard about the workshop offline, but we do appreciate your responses to those questions.
I'll stop sharing this one. Okay. All right, back to you, Shelby.
All right. So we're going to cover a few ground rules. We are talking about some really complex topics tonight. And so we want to make sure that we're all on the same page about how we're approaching the conversation and abiding to these ground rules. And so we have 4 different sort of groupings or things that we might lean back on if we find ourselves in challenging situations or having a tricky conversation. And we invite you all to help us elevate these ground rules with each other in the process. So the first is this practicing both or and. And we find that sometimes when you disagree with someone or you have a different opinion, you can use the word but. And that seems maybe like a natural word to be using in your speech. But we encourage you to substitute that word with and And so it's amazing what that can do in terms of creating a more inviting space, inclusive of a range of ideas, and acknowledging that maybe someone else's ideas and realities are different than yours. Both things can be true. We don't need to be exclusive in our thinking. The move up and move back ground rule is really intended to make space for all folks. And so in a virtual environment, it's challenging, to read some of the visual cues. And so we might just have some delayed pauses to make sure that people are accessing the technology appropriately, finding the mute button or unmuting appropriately. And then we also encourage you to kind of self-monitor on this. If you are a person that speaks a lot, be sure to make space for others to move up. And you may need to also find yourself moving back if someone's dominating the conversation. So if we're sensing that in one of our group discussions, we might ask you, hey, Molly, can you move up and provide your ideas? Or hey, Lynn, would you mind moving back to make space for some other opinions here? Confidentiality. We are recording the presentation part of tonight's meeting. As we go into the breakout groups, we want to create an environment where you feel welcome to share, and we're not going to record that. We want to respect your privacy. We're going to be talking about some personal things about experiences and concerns. So we ask that you also keep the conversation confidential and don't share what your group discussed outside of the meeting by identifying anyone's name. You can share ideas, but don't attribute it to an individual unless you ask their permission. Then finally, we were hoping that these ground rules help create a safe and a brave space. So we are asking for you to allow for honesty and maybe different opinions and not be judging, just be receptive to new information. And then we also encourage you to speak up, even if you have a half-baked idea and it might not feel like a climate change expert. We value your perspectives and opinions, and we appreciate folks being brave and speaking up, even if you feel a little wobbly in this topic area. So before we move on, I want to make sure everybody also upholds these ground rules. And so can you give me a quick okay in the chat function, or a thumbs up, or some sort of smiley icon? We just want sort of confirmation from critical mass that we're going to uphold these ground rules together. Wonderful. Okay, I see we've got lots of folks. So thank you. We appreciate everybody bringing this spirit of cooperation. As we get further into the conversation, some of the terms you hear might feel a little technical, or might be terms that you have not heard before. So we do have a resource guide on the project website. Imogen's going to plop this in the chat here. We've got a resource list of key terms and concepts. Feel free to pull that up and look at it and review it as the conversation progresses. Or if you just have a question, please raise your hand or put it in the chat, and would be happy to kind of clarify what we mean by the terminology here. All right, let us move on to our project orientation. I think we have critical mass, and we'll continue to troubleshoot tech stuff on the side if people have issues. So Jeremy.
Great, thank you. And I just want to add, before we dive into and get into sharing ideas and experiences, that, we're also open and acceptive of criticisms of things that the city isn't doing yet, where we can do it better. And so I want to make sure that you feel comfortable sharing those ideas and those concerns, and giving us an opportunity to figure out how we can solve those challenges or those issues for you. So just be mindful of that as you're participating in the breakout groups as well. And so we're just going to do a quick project orientation here. We started this process back in April of 2021 is when we released our initial RFP. But really, this climate action planning process has been several years in the making. The Sustainability Task Force has been working very hard for a number of years to encourage city leadership to pursue this process and to develop this plan. A climate action plan really sets the groundwork for climate work, sustainability work, and work on achieving clean energy targets for the city, and is an important first step in this process, and really builds off of a lot of the great work that we've done as a city in the past too. So we had a very competitive process with over 5 consultant teams submitting proposals for this project, and a very competitive process with a lot of great firms. Ultimately, we decided to move forward with the Brendel Group and RDG. They brought a really strong proposal forward, and a fantastic team of professionals who have worked with a number of cities and other organizations to develop climate action plans. And we're excited to have them here helping us through this process. And then we kicked things off internally in February of 2022. And we've really been setting the groundwork for this project for the last several months, ramping up our risk and vulnerability assessment, which we'll be talking about a little later in the presentation here, getting our outreach and engagement plan and materials together. And really, this public meeting is the first of many opportunities to engage in this planning process over the course of the summer and into the fall. And we're excited to have you here. So just a little background on Des Moines' sustainability legacy. We've been working on a number of sustainability efforts for years in this city, including creating the Sustainability Task Force. We're one of the first cities to achieve the Star Community designation. That's since morphed into Lead for Cities, and we're due to renew that here in 2023. We instituted the Energy and Water Benchmarking Program a couple of years ago, and we've been working closely with property owners to collect their energy and water use. And we've done a couple of greenhouse gas inventories now to get a baseline of where our emissions are and what the sources of those emissions are, and strategies that we can start implementing to reduce those emissions. A lot of this planning effort is also going to build off of some of the work from the 2019 Polk County Hazard Mitigation Plan. We're going to take some of those ideas, build on those, and customize this really for the city of Des Moines. And then a lot of you know that the city passed some fairly aggressive clean electricity and carbon reduction goals in early 2021. Council unanimously passed these goals, and we'll go over those in a little more detail here in a few more slides. But those are the goals that this planning effort will be working towards, and that'll be the driving force behind the actions that come out of this planning process. And we're really looking forward to developing some strategies that get us to this goal, and really having that be driven by all of you and the broader Des Moines community. Next slide. And Shelby, I think I'll turn it over to you here.
Okay, great. So we'll just begin with an acknowledgement that climate change is already here in some ways. And so we often think about climate change as something off in the distance in the future, and the impacts, we don't know what they're going to be. But in reality, we're starting to see some of these impacts and experience them in our social and economic and ecosystems. And so we are looking through this process at sort of what the climate change impacts might be. And you can see in the blue box here that might look like, hotter and more humid summers and extreme temperatures on both sides of things, in more intense periods of flooding as well as drought. What we really want to center on in this process are the impacts. We can't necessarily change a lot of those conditions with the climate. We can attempt to mitigate them through local actions and contribute to national and global activities as well. But we also need to be preparing and adapting to climate change impacts. And so again, we're centering in sort of the human impacts related to health and some of the populations that might be impacted, looking at critical services that folks rely on, property and infrastructure, as well as potential economic and ecosystem impacts and disruptions. As Jeremy mentioned, the city has already adopted some pretty aggressive emissions reduction goals. And so you can see those highlighted here. The first of which was adopted in 2016, and that's a 2025 goal that's looking for just over a quarter or 28% of emissions from 2008 levels reduced by 2025. Looking out further to 2030, that's a target of 45% reduction from 2010 levels. That's a pretty significant increase in a matter of 5 years. And then a transformative goal along this pathway, looking out towards the future, is in 2035. And this is a carbon-free electricity goal that aims to have 100% of the city's electricity that's carbon-free 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And then that will enable the community to be on target to then achieving the net zero greenhouse gas emissions goal on or before 2050. So these are already established goals. We're going to be doing some analysis through the process, looking at ways to enable actions and identify solutions to achieve these goals. But I also want to emphasize that we're going to be adding additional goals to this process around climate adaptation and resilience, as well as climate justice and equity. So we'll look for your input tonight and through this public engagement process to inform that goal development. And ultimately the steering committee, as well as the city council, will be adopting those additional goals. So just really quickly, ADAPT DSM is the project name, and it's also, our intention is that it's an ongoing program. It's not just this planning process, but we're really enabling change management at all scales of city government, as well as community systems. And so this is an effort to guide decision and making and policy, both for internal city operations and program and service delivery, but also we're hoping it serves as a sort of a uniting document for all the community partners and service providers that are going to be working in tandem with the city to achieve these goals. The city alone cannot do all the actions necessary to meet these ambitious goals. And so it really is an effort to align and strategically identify what the community can be working on together. It's not an effort that starts from scratch. There's a lot of great planning and policy and programmatic work that the city and other partners have already done, including Guide DSM, the city's strategic plan, Plan DSM, which is the comprehensive plan, and Move DSM, the transportation and mobility master plan. So we're hoping to leverage a lot of that great work, weave it in as it makes sense, as well as look for areas to further amplify and reinforce through this effort. Then finally, we hope that you all find some activities and actions in this plan that you all can mobilize on and move forward, both in your personal lives, as well as maybe the organizations you engage with. So our project timeline, I'll quickly cover here, is organized around 4 phases. And so we're currently just kicking off this first phase where we're exploring risks and opportunities, really exploring what problems do we need to solve from a climate change perspective, who's most impacted, what areas are most vulnerable, and what has or hasn't worked previously that we can learn from. As we move into the fall, we'll start exploring goals and solutions and getting more specific in discussing what are some of the trade-offs and benefits if we pursue one idea over another. As we head into early 2023, that's when we'll start emerging on a plan and the structure and prioritization of what's most important, what resources are needed, and more tactically, who's going to do what and when. The 4th phase will happen next spring, and that's really when the plan is adopted. And really that's as implementation, we're hoping implementation is already underway for some of these things. And again, that we're amplifying and leveraging them. But we'll be doing a lot of outreach in phase 4 to make the plan and its priorities known to everybody so that all community members and community organizations can understand their role and how they can engage in implementation. So as Jeremy and Molly have mentioned, we have a lot of engagement activities on the horizon. This is our first online community workshop. We also launched our first online survey just last week. So that QR code is available and we'll send, that's on the project website as well. So feel free to take that survey or share it with your friends, family, and colleagues. We're also holding a series of community conversations and pop-up events during the course of the summer to align with that first phase of engagement. As we go further into the process, we'll do kind of a repeat of these activities. So there will be lots of different ways to engage both online, in person, large group, small group, and that sort of thing. So we really ask for your help in identifying who we're not connecting with and identifying potential events, activities, groups that we could connect with in one of these different ways. So I'll pause here and see if anybody has any questions about the project or the process before we move on to next steps.
I did.
Go ahead, Matthew.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was actually just thinking about how are you planning to engage all the corporate partners? There's a lot of large institutions here in town with thousands of employees. So how is that going to be? How can you reach out to them?
Sure. Molly or Jeremy, do you want to handle that one?
Sure, Jeremy, you can start. I'll finish.
Yeah, absolutely. So as part of this process, we've created a steering committee and a group of technical advisory group members that are helping us with this process, and kind of we'll have a more day-to-day, week-by-week engagement in this process. And we've been sure to pull folks that represent a number of different organizations and sectors throughout the community into those groups and have them participate in this process. So that's one avenue. We've also created a community climate allies communications list that engages with a number of different business associations, nonprofit organizations, social services organizations throughout the community that can serve as those connectors to get the word out to the folks that they serve, to the employees within their organizations. And so we've started to engage with those groups as well and send out information about the planning process. And certainly we're looking to engage with the partnership and other business organizations that can help pull in representation from the business community across the city. And I know Molly has worked very closely on this in some more recent planning efforts and can speak to other strategies that we're using too.
Yep. And I'll just put a bow on that and say, along with everything Jeremy said, one of the other plans that we're going to continue to build on is one that just wrapped up for the Des Moines downtown. And so that really focused heavily on business because we were talking about sort of the change of work downtown from going to folks coming downtown to hybrid, which really impacted a lot of the larger corporations. So RDG, along with Baton Global, did some deep dives into corporate life in some of their plans. And so we'll be able to leverage some of that information and reach back out to those folks in a little bit more specificity to the climate plan. But the good news is the groundwork has laid, and we've been in contact with over 11,000 employees at the major corporations downtown. And so we started with a workforce study, and that's something that we'll be able to carry forward to reach back out to those folks and then talk about this more specifically. So good groundwork is being laid, but also, encouraging all of you to get the word out with the folks that you know as well. I'm letting a couple more folks in here, and I see a few more questions in chat. And so we'll try and address those as well as we move forward on with our agenda.
Yeah. I see a question about just the emissions reduction and where things stand, especially as it relates to the 2025 goal from the 2008 levels. And I would say on track, close to achieving the 2025 goal, although we're kind of estimating about a 5% gap currently. A lot of those gains have been made in the energy sector, specifically efficiency and renewable energy. And so as the energy supply cleans up in the coming years, we anticipate that will help fill that gap, but we are continuing to do some analysis on that.
And we certainly, just to build on that, certainly over the next couple of years as we work towards that goal, hope to accelerate opportunities to invest in and incentivize energy efficiency and clean energy projects throughout the community, using programs like the Polk County Solar Group Buy that's going on right now, and leveraging our energy and water benchmarking program to work with those major energy users, large energy users throughout the community to drive down their energy use also. So we do plan to share those greenhouse gas inventories on the ADAPT DSM website. So keep an eye out for those, and we'll get those up there for folks to be able to review. And a lot of those projections are going to be updated as we work through this planning process too, and wrap our heads around what some of the solutions are and better understand the pathways to get there. So, thank you.
I just want to comment on or respond to Pavlo's comment. We're talking about small businesses as well. Absolutely imperative that we involve those individuals as well. And so I would say my challenge to this group, as well as our challenge to ourselves, public engagement is going to be awesome this summer. And we really want to think about creative ways that we can do that. The community climate allies are really a group that can be a catch-all for anything. So if there are lists or folks or organizations or businesses that you really think should be part of that and that we should prioritize as our outreach this summer, absolutely give those to us. And we'll put our contact information in the chat too. But thinking about creative ways, if you're involved in organizations and things like that too, if there are fairs or events or opportunities where we can come speak or share, we're absolutely open to all of that. So we want this to be as collaborative and conversational as possible from start to finish. So ideas that you have, please write down and share with us as we move forward. And I'll hand things back off to Shelby because we're going to get into some small group discussions.
Yeah, before we do that, I want to just quickly touch on equity. And when we're talking about climate change, it's really important that we kind of use this analogy of an equity lens. And we're really being attentive and deliberate in looking at everything through this equity lens so that we can be creating more equitable and inclusive outcomes. And so very quickly, like why equity? What does it mean? So on the screen here, you'll see the City of Des Moines, their equitable services team definition. I see Manisha's on and was involved in the creation of this definition, but really it's focuses on creating choices, deliberately access and opportunities for all folks. And so it really centers on exploring what are some of the disparities in our community conditions. The graphic on the right here that shows just a handful of areas where we might see disparities, and we do see disparities in the Des Moines community. And so think of these little circles as lenses that we can be considering. Ideally, we'll have people from a range of perspectives participating in the process, sharing their opinions and perspectives. But even if we don't, we invite you to think about what lenses you can provide, either through your lived experiences or your education or your relationships, so that we can all be examining disparities through a number of different angles and perspectives. Why does climate change and equity intersect, and why does it matter? This is just one example of how climate change is an equity issue. So on the left side here, you see a map that shows the Des Moines community in this yellow boundary. And then you have in these purple and blue shades, some of the flood hazard areas, including the floodway and floodplain areas. When you scroll to the right or look to the right, you can see another map of the same area. And this is showing lower income areas of the community, where the darker red and orange segments are showing areas where you have a higher percentile or higher levels of populations with lower income. So if you can kind of mind meld and think about these maps together, interestingly enough, and maybe not surprisingly, if you have followed sort of the movements around redlining and decision-making around where communities have or haven't been, had resources in the past, you can see that there are some intersections between areas that are flood prone and maybe areas that have less access to resources. And so this is especially important when we start thinking about solutions and activities to address these challenges, because not everybody's on the same wavelength or playing field. We have areas that might not have the resources to flood-proof their homes or have the resources to evacuate or recover when flooding happens. So this is just one example. And again, we encourage you to be thinking about your equity lenses. And so with that, we've got two quick polling questions just to kind of check in on who's in the room virtually with us today and what makes you part of the Des Moines community and what perspectives you're bringing today. And these are short answer questions. So it might be that you're an educator, or you are a retiree, or you're a working professional. Those might be some ideas of what makes you part of the Des Moines community. What perspectives you're bringing today. Maybe that's you're bringing a perspective of a newcomer or a longtime resident or a renter or homeowner. So those are just a few examples. And we invite you to take that poll, and then we'll move on from here. Okay, Molly, I am not seeing the answers. So this might be one that we're just asking people to reflect as we go through the conversation today individually.
Yep, I think the short answer must be sent to us on the back end. So
great.
All right.
Okay. Well, the next segment of our agenda today is moving into the climate risk and vulnerability section. And so as we're approaching this project, as I mentioned earlier, we're already experiencing some of the climate impacts and hazards. And so our team has been working to classify what some of the major risks and hazards are or could be. And so we're looking at these 4 primary categories, but these aren't the only impacts and hazards that we might see from climate change. These are ones that are showing up in a lot of the scientific literature, as well as lived experiences. You know, you look at the news and recent events, we're aware of all of these. And so we'll go through these in our breakout groups in more detail. But you can see that all of these are categorized currently as a medium or medium-ish risk level, with a potential to be increasing to a medium or medium-high level over time. And so there's a lot of potential impacts. And so we want to be exploring that with you all today. What are you concerned about? What have you experienced? This is just one example. Last Friday, the news release around extreme heat. And so I know it was a really hot weekend, and there were some cooling centers and news alerts being sent out. And so this is what we mean by lived experiences and potential solutions, just to get you thinking.
And I'll also add that those key climate hazards that we've talked about aren't necessarily the only ones that are going to impact our community. And we want to hear your thoughts on any others that you think we should be concerned about, or that we should be considering in this process that are not captured there. So we'll prioritize those hazards and plan to the ones that we think are going to be most impactful on our community, but we want to hear about other ones that you're concerned about too.
Okay, so these are our last polling questions where we want to just take the full group's pulse before we break into our breakout groups and just understand what climate hazards have impacted you in Des Moines. And so you can see it's a multiple choice here, select all that apply. And then the second question is, which climate hazards are you most concerned about? So if you're not seeing the polling, feel free to chime in via the chat. The options listed include extreme precipitation and flooding, severe storm and winds, extreme temps, water scarcity and wildfire, mass movement, biological hazards, air pollution and poor air quality, none of the above or other. So if you pick other, we invite you to put that in the chat as well.
All right, we're seeing some answers. Things are definitely coming in. I know people have been experiencing some things even this week and seeing things on the news in other parts of the country that fit into these categories too. Right now, I'm seeing a lot in the severe storm and winds and extreme temperatures, as well as some flooding in terms of things that have personally impacted folks. And then when I move down to the ones that we're most concerned about, right now, extreme temperatures is winning. No surprise. I think that's what's impacting all of us even today. But also high on people's list is extreme precipitation and flooding, as well as severe storm and winds. And I'm seeing some things in the chat, if it's okay to read out. Other things are impact of climate change on the volatile energy prices that we're seeing. Definitely that's impacting folks, and kids playing outside and summer activities with the upcoming everybody being let out of school, or some other ideas people have had. So really appreciate everyone talking about that. And these are topics that we're going to explore more in your breakout sessions here. So I'll end this one so that you can see some results. Are you able to see that one?
We are. Yeah.
Awesome.
So extreme temperatures is definitely on the top of our minds this week, as well as severe storm winds, precipitation and flooding, air pollution, and then looking to the future, same. A lot of these kind of things that we're experiencing now, some valid concern about those in the future. Okay, so we are going to move into our breakout groups at this time. So we're going to break into 3 groups. So we have a team of facilitators. You'll have a lead facilitator and a supporting facilitator kind of guiding the discussion, but we really want to hear from you all. So we encourage you to turn on your videos, use the chat, use all the features available to you. And we're going to talk through these questions of what climate hazards have impacted you, what climate hazards are you most concerned about? And then in the breakout groups, so Imogen and Lynn as facilitators, they'll kind of talk you through the next steps of the slides as well. So after we finish this conversation, we'll move to the solutions and hear a little bit about that. And then we'll have a conversation about solutions. And then about 10 minutes before the top of the hour, so at 5:50, we'll convene as a large group, do a round of quick report outs from each group around what were some of the things you talked about, and then we'll do some final wrap up. So do we have any questions about logistics from the facilitators? I'm trying to catch up a little bit on time, so we're adjusting course with the agenda a little bit real time.
So many great ideas.
Awesome. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. We've got a couple folks still coming in here. Close this and I'll hand it off to Shelby for maybe some quick highlights and then our next steps.
Can you all see my screen and hear me? I'm navigating a lot of screen sharing and changes all at once. Okay, wonderful. Let's start with group 1 of Lynn and Jeremy first, as I collect my thoughts about some of what I want to report out from our group session.
Sure, I can go ahead and just do a quick report out. We flew through our slides trying to just get a little bit of feedback on all of them, but I think some of the things that really popped out to me was that we had a couple of people that kept hearing these phrases. They're not new, but maybe like in the last couple of years, folks are saying this never happens in Des Moines. This is the first time it's happening in Des Moines, and it just kept happening over and over again with these extreme events like polar vortex and things like that. Definitely a lot of concern over extreme heat, but even how that impacts our water supplies and how we can even care for plants with that. And then there's a lot more really good stuff, but we even got into some solutions that got pretty creative around advocating for policies and land conservation, making sure that we're thinking about incentives for our landlords so that our renters can actually enjoy these building retrofits and this solar and different pieces like that. So I can keep talking, but I think I'll pass it to the next facilitator.
Okay. I'll report out on group 2. Zach, feel free to chime in as well. We spent a lot of time looking at the climate hazards and didn't get to the solution. So you might see some of those showing up in the chat too. We had a lot of experiences with some of the temperature extremes and having, exposure of young kids at summer camps to high heat. We heard about neighborhoods that have experienced flooding and the levee improvements, hopefully helping to reduce some of that, but also the high groundwater table, creating some flooding situations in basements. We talked about the derecho and the power outages and the challenges with accessing kind of basic services and things like, as well as when the flooding happened, disruption of services like your water supply, your electricity, access to food, ability to keep medications refrigerated, all that stuff. We talked about water quality as the water supply and drought impacts happen, and concern about agricultural kind of impacts upstream and how that impacts the water quality in and downstream of Des Moines. We also talked about migrant communities and folks that are on limited incomes or that might not be English speakers, and how maybe communication is not reaching them during some of these events and hazards. And so you can kind of turn some of those into solutions and think about how to address those through better communications and better land management practices and reducing pesticide use and chemical use to improve water quality. So that's a long rambling list. Anything else, Zach, you would add that I missed?
I think you covered it very well.
Okay, great. Let's go to Imogen and Pat as our third group.
Sure, I can start. Kind of similarly to Shelby, I think we heard a lot of stories about the impacts of high temperature and the potential impacts of people who want to be outside, including people exercising, and kind of the long-term implications of those impacts. We also heard about the impacts of the derecho and of flooding particularly on power supplies, and this kind of led into some of the solutions that we heard around kind of increasing the resilience of energy supply through things like electric vehicles and storage, through improving the passive survivability of buildings, so making them more resilient, even if they are cut off from power as well. We heard about building electrification generally, kind of making the most of the benefits of transitioning to clean energy. So some interesting ideas around converting to geothermal, or working with the gas utility on electrification and that kind of thing as well. We heard about converting gardens to native plants, or incentivizing prairie strips for all residents, as well as kind of just generally making the connection to things that people already care about. So knowing that there's equity issues and kind of really connecting people to understand how those might be addressed, and the solutions that can kind of connect with what people care about. And Pat, feel free to jump in if I missed anything.
No, that was great. I would just say that the equity issues were really the frame up for the discussion that they had witnessed through the derecho, through the floods of '93, both during the events, immediately following, and the long-term response to the events had seen serious equity issues and wanted those to be addressed, and even pointed out, though, that we don't necessarily know how to address them. That needs to have some work.
All right. Well, as you can see, we're working on our timing and just kind of like how these meetings are running. So we appreciate you all being our first group. And so we didn't get to everything in your group. Don't worry, the online survey asks a similar set of questions, or we're going to be out in the community over the course of the summer. So this is not the only way to provide your ideas and input. So we invite you to continue the conversation and that format if the need arises, if you didn't get everything out in this limited time we had tonight. So in kind of wrap up and looking ahead, we're going to be engaging in these kind of risks and opportunities discussions through early August with this survey. Will be open through August 12th, and then through over the course of June, July, and August, you'll see Molly, Pat, Jeremy, and others out in the community at various events. And we would welcome your suggestions or invitations if you have an event that you think we should be at. And then as we look towards the fall, we'll do a second survey, another round of events, and then we'll head into the winter focusing on plan development. So here are the links and the QR codes. So feel free to scan it with your phone if you want. I'll keep this up for a minute, or Imogen put the survey link in the chat here. Feel free to open that up and share your ideas while they're top of mind, or you can revisit this a little bit later as needed. And then we also invite you to share any additional thoughts. If you have any photos of some of these events and how they've impacted you, or quotes that you think would be really important to include in the plan, we would love your additions. And so feel free to email those to sustainability@dmgov.org, and we'll get those in the queue, and ideally would have your permissions to include any photos or quotes in the plan itself. Molly, I saw that we may have a few words from the mayor, and then I'll pass it to you, Jeremy, for final wrap up.
Yeah. So I've just been checking in with the mayor to see if he's available to make a few comments here. I know he's been tuning in and out as he's available this evening, but Mayor County, if you're at the computer and available.
I'm at the computer, and I have really enjoyed listening to everybody's input in the wrap-ups. I'm sorry I had to jump out of our session, and so I didn't get to hear our group discussion. But I think it'd be important just for a moment to kind of, with my other hat on, working with the United Nations, and to just let everybody know the work that we're all doing together is what it's going to take for not only our city and our state and this country, but the world to achieve our goals. The IPCC's, sixth assessment report, illustrated so importantly and imperatively the need to limit our global temperature increase by that 1.5 degrees Celsius by collectively reducing, all of our carbon emissions to zero. And our city actions that we are taking towards this goal include, as was pointed out, looking at the decarbonization of our electricity grid and electrifying buildings, and looking at our land use and reducing, hopefully, vehicle miles traveled, and remembering the Tomorrow Plan as we as a region tried to come together to talk about that, where people live, where they work, where workforce housing should be, affordable housing should be. And as we move forward and looking at the electrification of transportation, what that means to public transportation and what it is that we do. And in addition, to our environmental benefits, we are learning that the renewables, wind and solar specifically, that we are really investing in and our providers are investing in, ultimately are cheaper than those carbon coal and gas sources. So not only does, that switch help reduce the cost to the environment, but also the cost to the consumers. And, our grid decarbonization requires ending the use of fossil fuels. Local governments, whether it's Des Moines or anywhere else, our efforts need to focus on data. And, we talked about our benchmarking and some of the stuff that we have done in the city of Des Moines. I will say occasionally with some hesitance and some resistance from private sector. But I think, if you can't measure, you can't manage what we're doing. And to see how we're doing with our greenhouse gas emissions and all of us working together, I think those are important things. And I will sort of tell you that I am proud to say that I think Des Moines is leading our 24/7 movement. In January 2021, a lot of you recall that our city council adopted that 24/7 carbon-free electricity resolution. And last month, when I was at the United Nations, I was the first mayor to sign on to the UN 24/7 carbon-free movement, electricity movement, or CFE, along with some global businesses and NGOs. So, let's collaborate to reimagine electricity and how it's generated and how we use it, when we use it, and hopefully make our buildings much more efficient and working with our private sector owners. Elected officials demonstrate their leadership through commitments to the race to zero. That 24/7 CFE is an essential building block towards that race to zero, and to make our communities more resilient and healthy and equitable. And we've all, was noted, talked about some of the extreme events that have happened, the heat and the storms and the droughts and everything else, and also looking at our watershed and the quality of our water and what's happening and how it's affected by climate and everything else that's happening in our watershed. And we could talk about that in another moment, but I want to thank everybody for your efforts. Let's keep working together. And Jeremy, I'm going to quickly kick it over to you, and thanks for giving me a minute.
Great. Thanks, Mayor County. We appreciate your time, taking the time to join us today. And I extend that thanks to everyone else on this call that's joined us today to provide your feedback. And we really want to make sure that this plan represents the voices of the community. And so I'll reiterate that if you think there are people that have been left out of this process or not included in these conversations yet, please help connect us to them so that we can get them involved and we can get them engaged and really develop a plan that has buy-in and support and inspires our community and everyone in our community. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Shelby if you have anything else to touch on. Otherwise, thank you everyone for joining us.
Yeah, we just invite you in closing. Feel free to just log off, or if you are inspired, I am, hearing about how Des Moines is leading the world in this 24/7 goal, as well as this initiative. Would love to hear your thoughts about how you're going to take action in our party moments here. But just, again, extend our gratitude for your time and your energy, and we hope your commitment to this process. We hope to see you again in person or online at future activities and events. Have a great evening, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.